Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. Our society today is more connected than any other society has been probably in the history of mankind. With social media and the internet, we are very much connected to people not only in our own house, in our own community, but even across the world. And so time and time again, we come across people who encounter tragedy and hardships and trials. And again, probably more so than any previous generation before. And so we come across this so frequently that it's very important for us to know how to respond when we come across people who have experienced tragedy, whether it's someone that we are encountering face to face or that we are perhaps communicating with via the internet or social media or something like that. It's important for us to know how to respond. And the book of Job is a good resource for us because it really teaches us how not to respond to people who are suffering. And we can use a man who is actually suffering, probably more so than anyone could ever imagine to suffer. And he gives us instructions on how to be sorry comforters. He brings out the deficiencies in his friends as they had came to be with him during his suffering, to communicate to him, and as they have gotten it all wrong. And so as we listen really closely to what Job tells his friends, we can learn ourselves what not to do when someone is suffering. And we'll also include in this devotion what we should do when we encounter someone suffering. But first, we're going to look at some truths about sorry comforters. And this comes out in our reading today in chapter 16 and verse 2, where it says, "Then Job answered, I have heard many such things. Sorry comforters are you all." And as we look back on what we previously read and we look ahead a little bit to what we will read, we'll come across these things. For one, these sorry comforters were a great disappointment. That's one of the truths about a sorry comforter. It's someone who you might expect to dish out comfort and help or alleviate some of the pain and suffering an individual is going to, but they go to them and they find really no help at all. In chapter 6, in verses 14 through 23, Job uses an analogy of a wadi, which is like a small stream, perhaps in a rocky place, that sometimes holds water, but the water often will evaporate and go away. And he talks about these travelers who go up to these wadis and they seek water, but when they get there, they're just disappointed. There's no water at all. And that's the analogy that he uses for his friends, to say, you know what, the very people I should expect comfort from really are offering no comfort at all. And so sorry comforters are really a disappointment to those who are suffering. But they also oftentimes hold calamity in contempt, to use Job's words. In chapter 12 in verse 15, he talks about that in connection to his friends. There he says, "He who is at ease holds calamity in contempt, as prepared for those whose feet slip." So in other words, a person who's at ease, who isn't feeling the suffering that the other person is feeling, will oftentimes have a tendency to look on their suffering with contempt. In connection to Job's friends, they had looked down on him with contempt and assumed that he must have sinned and done something wrong to cause all these problems to happen in his life. And so they, being at ease, found it very easy to look on Job with contempt. And sometimes people do that. The sorry comforters will look on those who are suffering with contempt. And then sorry comforters think they have all the answers. Whenever they come across a person who's suffering, they try to give a bunch of answers to the questions that the sufferer might have and think that they have all the answers that could be given. This also was true of Job's friends. We could look at chapter 12 in verses 2 and 3, where it says, "Truly then you are the people, and with you wisdom will die." In other words, you guys think you have all the wisdom. He goes on to say in verse 3, "But I have intelligence as well as you, and I am not inferior to you. And who does not know such things as these?" He says something very similar in chapter 13. In verse 2, he says, "What you know, I also know. I am not inferior to you." So Job really felt from his friends that they thought that they had all the answers, that they could really inform Job about his situation and really give him all the answers that he needed, when really they didn't have any more answers than he did. And it's very important for us, if we don't want to be sorry comforters, to not try to solve the sufferer's every problem and answer every question as though we have all the answers. Sometimes there are no answers that we have on this side of heaven, and we don't know exactly why a person is going through what they're going through. And to attempt to presume that we know the answers can be really abrasive, especially to the person who is suffering. Sorry sufferers also would be better off just being silent, Job would say. In chapter 13, verses 4 and 5, he says, "But you smear with lies. You are all worthless physicians. Oh, that you would be completely silent, and that would become your wisdom." So sorry comforters would be better off just not saying anything at all. If you're not good at comforting someone, if you are awkward, or you end up being more hurtful than doing any good, it's better just not to say anything at all. And that's true of sorry comforters. It was true of Job's friends, and it's true of sorry comforters even today. And then also, sorry comforters oftentimes use trite sayings and use windy words, to use the New American Standard. In chapter 13 and verse 12, Job says, "Your memorial sayings are proverbs of ashes. Your defenses are defenses of clay." So these memorial sayings, that really seems to creep up when someone is suffering. Someone just tries to throw out some easy axiom or some cliche or something, some easy statement, as though that's going to solve the problem, as though that's going to bring comfort to the sufferer. And oftentimes they don't. Oftentimes they are like windy words, as we find in chapter 16 and verse 3. "Is there no limit to windy words? Or what plagues you that you answer?" In other words, windy words are vain words, words that don't help. They're useless. They're empty. They're just sayings that don't really hold any weight and don't really help the sufferer. But then also, sorry comforters are condescending. I find that often to be the case. That was true with Job. It says, "If indeed you vaunt yourselves against me and prove my disgrace to me." It says they vaunt themselves. They are treating Job's situation with pride in themselves and really looking on his situation in a very condescending way. And oftentimes people who encounter other sufferers can do that. They'll say things like, "Well, you just need more faith." Or, "If you were really devoted to God, this situation wouldn't be bothering you that much." Things along those lines. And they just speak very condescending to people who are suffering. And so this makes for a very sorry comforter. So as we look at how Job describes sorry comforters, he would say they are a disappointment. They hold calamity and contempt. They think they have all the answers. They would be better if silent. They use trite sayings and windy words and are condescending. So this should instruct us on what we should not do when encountering someone who's suffering, whether it's personally, face-to-face, or via the internet. Now let's look at how we can be a good comforter. There are plenty of scriptures that teach us how we should comfort people in their distress. For one, we should meet their needs. Acts 20 and verse 35 talks about meeting the needs of those who are needy. It says it's better to give than to receive. And the idea here is that you just meet their needs. Sometimes that brings comfort. If a person doesn't have to worry about what meals they're going to cook or have to deal with certain financial issues and problems that might arise in connection to their suffering, when you can take care of a lot of the physical needs that they have, that in and of itself can bring a lot of comfort. If nothing else, they'll be comforted in knowing that someone cares about them and is trying to take care of them. Another way to be a good comforter is to bear their burdens. Romans chapter 15 and verse 1 talks about this. Also Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2 talks about bear each other's burdens. And the idea here is that we don't criticize or be prideful or hold people's burdens in contempt, but help them shoulder those burdens. Anything that they need, if it's a mental burden that they have, a physical burden that they have, a financial burden that they have, just bear those burdens for them. And then also to sympathize with them. That is to almost respond as though you're in the suffering and the trial with them. In Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 3, it talks about, and remember those who are in bonds as though you yourself is in bonds with them. Romans 12 and verse 15 talks about weeping with those who weep. And we're just being able to have a heart for those people, to have compassion, to sympathize with them, and to connect with them, sometimes even emotionally, so that you kind of feel what they feel. And in doing so, you can help bear their burden. But then we'd also say, just be present. Just be there for them. Again, sometimes it's better just to sit in silence than to speak up and end up saying something hurtful or not very helpful. Just to be present with them, to know that you're there for them, to support them, goes a very long way. And we can definitely see that even here with Job, as his friends started out doing that. For a week, they just sat with him, and that was probably the best thing they ever did for him. It was when they began to speak that they began to actually injure and hurt him and not bring any comfort at all. So these are some things we can reflect on as we very frequently come across people who are suffering. Let's remember these things. We don't want to be sorry comforters. We want to be helpful comforters. We want to be people who actually benefit others who are suffering. And when we do that, we stand in the place of Christ for them. And we represent Christ for them, as Christ himself cares for those who are suffering. He himself having also suffered on our behalf. And we're able to extend the compassion, the love, the grace that Christ has for individuals, and to express that in the way that we respond. So that's the way that we want to interact with people who are suffering. And so these are some things we can reflect on and think about as we do our readings today. And with that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.